Well, greetings, YouTube Trijicon fans. If you've ever wondered how one of these inexpensive ACOG knockoffs compared to a real Trijicon ACOG, you've come to the right video. This is the only video that I know of that actually compares optical and mechanical performance differences of the Chinese Imitation ACOG to the real deal. Let's see how it does. So these are the topics that I'm going to discuss in this video. I'm going to explain the background for why I did these tests and give a very broad overview of the similarities between the real ACOG and the imitation ACOG. But the bulk of this video deals with the performance differences between these two scopes. Now, with the exception of holding zero, which I do see discussed in some of the other videos, I don't see any of these other topics addressed in those videos. Mostly they focus on the cosmetic differences, which I'm not even going to really address in this video. I may do a separate video for those. But if I were thinking about buying one of these fake ACOGs, these are the things that I would want to know something about. So this is going to be a fairly long video. So I've put the time indexes here off to the right. So if you want to skip ahead to some particular subject, you can do so. But if you tough it out and watch it all, then towards the end I give the summary and conclusions that I came to about the imitation ACOGs versus the real ACOGs. And then finally I provide my recommendations concerning these scopes. The background behind this test is that between February and May of 2018, I bought and tested 5 Chinese Imitation ACOG Scopes from 4 different dealers, 3 in the US and 1 in Japan. Now, I own 2 genuine Trijicon ACOGs for guns that I like and that I shoot often. My main intent was to explore the possibility of using these inexpensive imitation ACOGs on some base model AR-15s that I really only use when I organize shooting days for the foreign professionals that I work with in my office that do not have the opportunity to own or use firearms. Those shooting activities have been quite popular, and I'm going to continue doing those once or twice a year. But regardless of the price that I paid or which dealer sold the scopes, all the imitation ACOGs apparently came from the same factory and all tested identically. Here are my results. Briefly, the similarities can be condensed into one slide, and I can state that the appearance is quite similar. The length is very similar, differing only by a few millimeters from the real deal. The weight is almost right on the money, and the eye relief is pretty much the same. The length of a real ACOG is 153 millimeters, and the fake ACOG has a slightly longer eyepiece extension and comes in at 156 millimeters. Weight-wise, these are almost equal. The real ACOG on the left weighs 426 grams, and the fake ACOG on the right weighs 424 grams, which if you look at in English units, they both come out to be 15.0 ounces. So pretty much indistinguishable weight-wise. And then in terms of the eye relief, this is also quite similar, and in both cases advertised correctly, because in the owner's manual of a real ACOG it says that the eye relief is 1.5 inches, and in the owner's manual for the fake ACOG it says that it's 1.5 inches. I tested both of these and found them to be basically accurate. Now, it is true that the real ACOG has a slightly wider field of view, which we'll see in a few minutes, so it is possible to kind of back off a little bit with your eye and still see a pretty good field of view equal to the fake ACOG. But if you're going to see the whole field of view on both of these scopes, then really the eye relief is the same, 1.5 inches. So let's talk about the focus error, which I see as the biggest performance difference. All 5 scopes that I tested had an identical focus error. All were out of focus and required approximately 2.25 to 2.5 diopters of correction to be focused similarly to a real ACOG. To focus on the reticle and image of the fake ACOGs, your eyes must be focused about 18 to 20 inches away, as though you were reading a book, rather than at infinity like on a real ACOG. You may not notice a problem unless you need reading glasses. It's possible to install a corrective lens in the eyepiece of the imitation ACOG to correct this problem. I show how to do this in another video. See the description of this video for the link to my other video that's called Correcting the Focus on Chinese Imitation ACOG Scopes. But here's a view through a genuine Trijicon TA31F with the red chevron, and the camera is focused at infinity, and the background on either side of the scope and the image and reticle in the scope are both in focus, which is the way it is on all real ACOGs. Similarly, on my TA31 RCO ACOG, which also has a red chevron, with the camera focused at infinity, both the scope image and the background image is in focus. This is the way things should be. But on the fake ACOGs, if the camera is focused at infinity, you can see that the background to the left and right of the scope is in focus, but the reticle and image in the scope is blurry. This was also true on this other fake ACOG with the green chevron. The image and reticle are blurry. And similarly on this scope, which is the one I got from Japan, and it has the crosshair reticle, the image and reticle are blurry, whereas the camera's focused at infinity and the background on either side of the scope is in focus. This is not a good deal, but if you can focus your eyes up close, then like in this photograph where the camera's focused at 18 inches, that image and reticle become clear, although the background is out of focus. Similarly, on this red chevron fake ACOG, the image in the scope is now clear and the background is blurry because the camera is focused at 18 inches. So I mentioned that it is possible to install a corrective lens in an imitation ACOG to correct this focus problem. The way I did that is I bought a cheap pair of reading glasses from the dollar store, and I cut out a circular piece of one of the lenses with a Dremel tool, and I ground the edges down smooth so that it would fit in the rear eyepiece area of the imitation ACOG, and I epoxied it into place, and it did solve that focus problem. That's not the point of this video, I'm just mentioning that it can be done. So with the corrective lens in place, this fake ACOG is now in focus, and we can see that with the camera focused at infinity, the image and reticle in the scope are in focus as well as the background. Now this photo and the next 2 photos are the only ones in this presentation that deal with an installed corrective lens. This photo shows the green chevron reticle in another fake ACOG, and with the corrective lens everything is focused with the camera at infinity, and this was a successful operation. And finally, with the crosshair fake ACOG, we have the reticle image and background all in focus at infinity as it should be. Now, these three photos that I've just shown are the only ones with the corrective lens installed. All of the other tests in this video dealing with field of view and brightness and geometric distortion and so forth, all of that was done without a corrective lens in place. It was as these scopes came from the factory. So now we're going to talk about field of view. I tested the field of view by spacing small orange cones a foot apart at a distance of 100 feet and observing the number of cones visible in the scope. I don't know why Trijicon mixes their units in the ACOG specs, sometimes using inches, feet, and yards, and sometimes using meters, but they do. Anyway, the owner's manual for the Trijicon TA31 states that the field of view is 36.8 feet at 100 yards. This translates to 12.3 feet at 100 feet. I verified this value using the cones and found that it is correct. The owner's manual for the imitation ACOG states that the field of view is 33 feet at 100 yards. This translates to 11 feet at 100 feet, which I also verified and found to be correct. In this video, we see on the left a picture of this little boat taken through a real ACOG and a slightly smaller field of view of the same subject area taken with a fake ACOG. Now I've adjusted the exposures so that the brightness of these images is similar. But if we then superimpose the field of view of the fake ACOG onto the real ACOG, this is what we get. We get about a 25% larger field of view in the real ACOG, but we get a usable field of view in the fake ACOG. Similarly, if we look at this mountain view, we have a very similar image overall, which if we superimpose the fake ACOG view onto the real ACOG, we see the same kind of thing. And then finally, here's where I actually measured the field of view using the orange cones. And on the left with the real ACOG, we see there's actually a little more than 12 feet that is visible across the center of the field of view for the real ACOG, whereas on the fake ACOG, it comes out just about exactly 11 feet visible in its field of view. Image brightness. So the Trijicon ACOG produces an image brightness that is slightly brighter than the image seen by the naked eye. The imitation ACOG produces an image brightness that is slightly dimmer than the image seen by the naked eye. This may not be obvious because the eye does a good job adjusting for different light intensities, but a camera provides a more honest comparison. So in order to produce a photographic exposure through the imitation ACOG that is similar to the real ACOG, the exposure must be increased about 2.5 times. That is to say, the imitation ACOG has an image brightness only about 40% of the real ACOG. So in these images taken of the same subject at the same time of day, we see that the real ACOG has a brighter image using the very same exposure as with the fake ACOG on the right. In this case, the camera was set at a 2,000th of a second at f8, and the fake ACOG was with the same exposure and the same ISO value. And we notice that there is a noticeably dimmer image through the fake ACOG. So here we see that by increasing the exposure to the fake ACOG about 2.5 times and using a shutter speed of 1/800th of a second instead of 1/2000th of a second on the real ACOG, we get an exposure that looks about the same through both scopes. So this isn't a precise measurement, but it's a pretty good approximation, I think, to demonstrate that the fake ACOG only has an image brightness about 40% of the real ACOG. Geometric distortion. So I also only did a kind of qualitative assessment of the geometric distortion, the common types being barrel distortion, where the center of the image appears to bulge outward, and pincushion distortion, where the center of the image appears to be pushed inward. Most optics display some level of geometric distortion. Both scopes display some amount of pincushion distortion, but the imitation ACOG displays a more noticeable amount of pincushion distortion, as indicated in the following photographs. Here on the left is an image taken of this building with the real ACOG, and if you put a straight edge on the screen, you can probably see that the sides of the building do not appear exactly straight, but they're pretty close to the naked eye. But on the fake ACOG to the right, you can see with the naked eye that the sides of the building are bowed inward because of pincushion distortion. Next, we look at the chromatic aberration. The chromatic aberration, or color fringing, is a color distortion that creates an outline of unwanted color along the edges of objects in an image. Often it appears along metallic surfaces or where there's a high contrast between light and dark objects. So in this photo, which I took of the sky, or these photos that I took of the sky, and I somewhat overexposed them to create a stronger contrast between the light and dark areas, you can see that the real ACOG on the left has very minimal color fringing, but the fake ACOG has quite a bit of color fringing. And we will see that also in this next photo of that same building that we looked at for the geometric distortion. If you look up along the roof line of this building, on the real ACOG, there's minimal color fringing, but there's quite a bit heavy color fringing on the fake ACOG. Which brings us to the reticle and bullet drop compensation. So to me, the reticle and bullet drop compensation differences is a pretty big deal. Trijicon ACOGs feature a reticle that is specifically sized for purposes of estimating target distance. On the TA31, the bottom of the chevron reticle represents a distance of 19 inches, or the approximate width of a person at 300 meters. The width of each bullet drop mark underneath that chevron also represents 19 inches at that respective distance. Thus, the line for the 600 meters is half the width of the 300-meter chevron. The manual for the imitation ACOG contains no explanation of the chevron or bullet drop lines. The chevron is about 1.5 times as large as on the real ACOG, so it could represent the width of a 19-inch target at 200 meters, but the width of bullet drop lines do not scale to the chevron and appear to be randomly sized or merely decorative. Here's a picture of the 5 types of reticles that I dealt with for this test. On the left are the 2 genuine Trijicon ACOGs, the TA31F and the TA31 RCO M4, and we see that those chevrons are smaller than the chevrons to the right on the fake ACOGs. And then on the farthest right is the crosshair reticle on a fake ACOG. These are all shown approximately to scale, so you can see what the size difference is. Now on this slide, where we see the full field of view for both the real ACOG and the fake ACOG, we see that not only is the chevron smaller on a real ACOG, all of the line divisions on the vertical and horizontal lines are smaller divisions than on the fake ACOG. If we zoom in on those reticles, we get a better understanding of how off scale the fake ACOGs are. So on a real ACOG on the left, the base of the chevron again is calibrated to represent 19 inches, or the width of a person, at 300 meters. So the width of stadia lines is 19 inches at each respective distance. On the fake ACOG, the chevron's about 1.5 times larger than the true ACOG, but it is not calibrated for 556 or 223 in any way, although it appears to be close to the ballistics for a 7.62 by 39 round. I'll notice that the TA31 RCO M4 is calibrated for a 5.56 NATO round, 62 grain, coming from a 14.5 inch barrel. And the TA31F is calibrated for a 223 Remington 55 grain bullet coming from a 20 inch barrel. So they're not exactly the same as each other, but they're pretty close. On the other hand, the fake ACOG is not even pretty close. Oh, one other thing. So on the real ACOG, if you look at the horizontal lines there in the upper left, it appears to me that the distances marked off on that horizontal line correspond to a 19-inch target at 100 meters. So that can also be used to help gauge target distance. So here I took a yardstick and set it up at a arbitrary distance away from the scope and the camera. In this case, it was 42 feet away, which was a convenient distance in my backyard, but I kept that distance constant for each of the 5 scopes that I tested, and I measured the distance between the bullet drop compensation lines at that same constant distance, and then I scaled up the bullet drop predictions for 100 meters, 200 meters, 300 meters, and so on, based on what it looked like at this 42 feet. So I came up with this summary chart where on the left we have the predicted bullet drops through a genuine ACOG, the TA31F on the very left, and then TA31 RCO M4 right next to that. We see that at 200 meters, both of these scopes predict a bullet drop of about 5 inches. Now, they're not going to be in exact agreement with each other because, one, those 2 scopes are calibrated for a different kind of bullet coming from a different barrel length. They will be close, however. Also, there's some experimental error in my ability to read the bullet drop markings on the photographs of the yardstick, but these are pretty close. And with the fake ACOG, the bullet drop distances are not at all close, and we see these in the red here. They predict a much larger bullet drop, which is definitely not calibrated for 556 or 223, but may be pretty close to an optimistic trajectory for 7.62 by 39. And by optimistic trajectory, I mean a hotly loaded round fired from a longer than average barrel, such as a sniper version of the Kalashnikov, something that would have a somewhat flatter trajectory than the typical AKs that most people have. But happy surprise, for the fake ACOG with the crosshair reticle, its predicted bullet drop values are actually pretty close to the real ACOGs. They're not exactly the same, but they're not too far off. So if you're going to shoot 223, you might want to consider getting the crosshair version fake ACOG, because it is actually pretty close to accurate. As far as holding zero is concerned, the question most people seem to have about the fake ACOGs is Do they hold zero? I wanted to take a conservative approach on testing, so rather than test on a semi-automatic AR-15 firing 223-556 rounds, I first tested the fake ACOG on an AR-15 firing 7.62 by 39 rounds for its higher recoil. The recoil energy on a typical 5.56 round is about 3.5 to 4 foot-pounds, depending on the bullet and the weight of the rifle. For the 7.62 by 39 round, it's typically 7 or 8 pounds, or almost twice as much. So I figured if it held zero for the 7.62 by 39, it almost certainly would hold zero for the 223. Now, I didn't experience the reticle failing to hold zero because of recoil per se. However, the scope did lose zero by removing and then remounting the scope. I attribute this to the mount being made from an inferior, softer metal that deforms more than a real ACOG mount. A real ACOG should hold zero if you remove and remount it. I removed and remounted the fake ACOG 3 times on the 7.62 by 39 upper and had to re-zero the scope 3 times. However, by the 3rd time, it came close to holding zero. Next, I tested the fake ACOG on a full-auto 9mm submachine gun. It seemed to generally hold zero until I removed the scope and remounted it. It was not far off this time, however. Okay, so one of the questions I've been asked a lot ever since I posted my video on how to install a corrective lens in one of these cheap Chinese Imitation ACOGs is whether or not these scopes hold zero. So far for me they have, but we're going to give it a little bit of full auto test and see how it does. Next, I tested the fake ACOG on a full-auto 5.56 machine gun. The reticle seems to hold zero per se, but after a few magazines, the fake ACOG shook loose from its base. That is to say, the scope shook loose from the fake TA31 mount. I had never experienced that before on my real ACOGs. After that, I applied blue thread locker to the screws holding my fake ACOGs onto their fake TA51 mounts, and I recommend everybody do this. Okay, so following my last trip to the range, from which we saw a few clips just now, I didn't notice that the reticle within the scope had lost zero, but what I did notice happened is that the scope itself became loose from its base. So where my problems with respect to holding zero have come with these cheap knockoffs are actually because of the base. For example, when I've removed it and put it back on to see if it would hold zero, it has not, at least on the first couple, 3 times that I took it off and put it back on. I had to re-zero it. It did get closer to holding zero by the 3rd time I took it off and put it back on. But then here, this is the most recent thing, so that's a problem. So it's these screws right here on the scope mount, bottom of the scope mount, holding the scope to the mount, where we lost zero under some full auto fire, a few magazines, and these screws are something that you'll probably want to take out and lock tight, or put some thread locker on before you mount the scope on whatever weapon you choose to put it on. Finally, water resistance. I tested a real ACOG and an imitation ACOG for water resistance by submerging them in our aquarium. As a precaution for the safety of the fish, I rinsed the scopes off under the faucet and wiped them off to remove harmful oils or materials on the outside of the scopes before putting them in the aquarium. After I rinsed off the first imitation, which was the red chevron imitation, I changed my mind about putting that scope in the aquarium because I liked that one the best and didn't want to risk it. I decided to do the submersion test on the crosshair imitation ACOG and rinsed that one off as well. After submersing the real ACOG and the imitation crosshair ACOG for 1 hour, I discovered the imitation leaked badly. Later, I also discovered that the imitation ACOG that I had only rinsed off briefly and not submerged at all had also leaked significantly. Okay, so one of the things I'm going to test just for fun, it's not really an optical performance difference, but it would be an operational performance difference, and that's kind of to assess at least a little bit whether or not these scopes are waterproof. Now, it's not going to be a fair test because I know that the real ACOG is supposed to be waterproof with the cap removed to a depth of 11 meters and with the cap on to a depth of 100 meters, which is pretty astonishing. But you can look at that turret there and you see the O-ring, and it looks like a pretty robust system, and I'm pretty confident that it will be waterproof with the test that I'm going to do. On the other hand, the adjustment screw on the imitation ACOG, this looks pretty cheap. There's no indication there that that's going to be water resistant at all, so I'm going to leave the cap on. There is a O-ring at the base of this turret that the cap contacts, so if I leave the cap on, I think it'll be somewhat water resistant. So it's not going to be a completely fair comparison, but just for fun, I'm going to go put these scopes in the water and see how they do. Okay, so here I'm going to take the real Trijicon. I'm going to put it in our aquarium here by my model Titanic. It does not have the caps on the adjustment turrets, and the fake ACOG, I left the caps on, but I'm going to put it down here by the bow of the Titanic. And right now it looks to be just about 3 o'clock, so we'll let these scopes soak for about an hour or so and see how they do. Okay, so these scopes have been soaking for about an hour. Let's take them out. Hopefully there were no harmful chemicals on these scopes to hurt the fish. I actually did rinse them off before I put them in the aquarium. I didn't show that, but I actually did do that just in case there was something on there. Okay, now let's have a look at these. Okay, so following the real Trijicon's submersion in the aquarium, it came out fine. Scope and the reticle are completely clear. I don't know if this will show up very well, but it did come out. It's completely clear. On the other hand, for the fake ACOG, it did not come out of this so well. I don't know what is going on there, but it's like the lens or prism is actually shifted, which I don't think could have happened. But it is not, it's not really very usable. So water has leaked in here and really messed things up. I mean, at best I can get kind of a egg-shaped view through the scope, but it's not the full circle, which I don't understand that. It's kind of weird. So the fake Trijicon, even with the caps tightly in place over the windage and elevation adjustment screws, leaked water. Following the water submersion test, which this fake ACOG failed miserably, I removed this housing, which I had not done before. I have never removed this before. I see it does actually have an O-ring gasket, but that didn't do any good. And you can see on that lens there, there's droplets of water on that lens. This is on the inside surface of that lens. This is the factory lens. This is not the corrective lens that I put on the outside. That one is fine. There's no water that leaked in through my corrective lens, but it leaked in through here. Even though there's a gasket there. Also, this prism here, I don't know if this is showing up, but if you look on the right here, there's like a crescent obscuration in the image through this prism, and where I think that comes from is water has seeped into the prism housing here, right at the edge of where the screwdriver is, gotten in there, and water is now on the side of that prism, interfering with the light transmission through this prism. So instead of having a clear circular view, you have this kind of an obscured oval view looking through this prism. So hopefully when this scope dries out, it'll work again okay, I hope. But this was not a good finding. And it isn't just this one example of the imitation ACOG scope. I actually did, I didn't show this on the camera, but I actually held this scope with the caps over the adjustment screws tightly in place, and I held this under the faucet for just a minute or two to kind of wash it off, thinking I would put this in the aquarium also. There's water inside this scope, so this scope is not even slightly water resistant. I think it leaked in this gap here where they have these 4 screws holding the back of the scope on. That seems to be where that water has gotten into. So not so great for the Chinese ACOG. So summary and conclusions. What did we learn from this exercise? Between February and May of 2018, I compared the optical parameters of 5 imitation ACOGs to 2 genuine ACOG TA31 scopes. The most important difference for me is that the imitations are out of focus compared to a real ACOG. The shooter's eye must be focused at 18 to 20 inches and not infinity. It is possible to make a corrective lens from an inexpensive pair of reading glasses with a correction of plus 2 1/4 to 2.5 diopters. The field of view at 100 feet is approximately 11 feet for the imitations versus 12.3 feet for a real ACOG. The bullet drop compensator lines in the imitation ACOGs with crosshair reticles are close to those in a real ACOG with crosshairs. The bullet drop compensator lines in the imitations with the chevron reticles are useless for 223 or 5.56 rounds. But they appear to be close for the ballistics of 7.62 by 39 millimeter rounds. The image in the imitations is slightly dimmer than the real ACOGs. So red means bad, green means good, and yellow means cautionary. There is noticeably more chromatic aberration at the edges of the field of view for the imitations. The imitations seemed to hold zero using 7.62 by 39 millimeter rounds, which has about twice the recoil of 5.56 by 45, and would therefore probably be fine with the lower recoil of 5.56 or 2.23 rounds, as long as the scope remained on the gun. The imitations did not hold zero if removed from the rifle and remounted the first few times, but on later installations they were close to zero. Under full auto 5.56 fire, the imitation ACOG shook loose from its mounting base. The imitation ACOGs are not even slightly water resistant. Water intrusion is a real possibility even in the rain. My opinion is that the imitation ACOGs are worth the $100 price tag only for light usage as a range toy in dry weather. If the reticle is blurry for you and requires a corrective lens, it may not even be worth the $100 price tag to you. So, my recommendations? I do not recommend the imitation ACOGs for use on an AR-15 or similar firearm, and I will not be using them on any of my AR-15s in the future. Even the base models I only use once or twice a year due to the out-of-focus image in reticle, even though I fixed this on mine. The complete lack of water resistance. The non-calibrated reticles and bullet drop markings. Failure to hold zero when removed and remounted. So for an inexpensive rifle or upper or any weapon you expect to use in an important or critical application, I recommend investing in a quality optic such as a real Trijicon ACOG. I do recommend the imitation ACOGs in dry weather only for airsoft weapons and shorter range firearms such as 9mm and 22 long rifle, where bullet drop compensation calibration is unnecessary. In fact, I may keep one on my 9mm Lage Max 31 submachine gun for the indefinite future. I recommend buying replicas that are not stamped with the Trijicon name. In my opinion, the Trijicon labels make the replicas counterfeits, which I believe should be illegal to sell. I can recommend Terminus optics for that reason. They were identical to the others except for the name stamp. Plus, they were the least expensive of the scopes I bought. O-Hunt is also a benign label. So, I bought 5 imitations from 4 dealers, 1 in Japan and 3 in the US, in an effort to get a reasonably representative sample. Your results may vary. Feel free to post comments below. Thank you for watching this video. And finally, okay, I see a row of soda pop bottles over there. Let's see what we can do about that. Well, that's what we could do about it.